No room for you and the kids. We're full. My mom said, like every holiday before. Yet somehow, my brother's kids, my ex-wife, and dog filled the table. I never argued. But this year, I bought a 5-bedroom loft in Manhattan. When mom said, "We'll be there tonight," my reply was cold. It was Christmas Eve, and my phone lit up like it was running on pure, concentrated tradition. The bad kind. The kind that makes you question whether being part of a family is actually worth the emotional copay. I was standing in my gloriously cramped 1-bedroom apartment, trying to untangle a string of lights that looked like they'd been through a bar fight, when the notification pinged. I already knew what it was before I even looked. Call it intuition, call it pattern recognition, call it years of being emotionally conditioned like one of Pavlov's dogs. Except instead of salivating, I just sighed. I picked up my phone, and there it was, glowing on the screen like a neon sign outside a dive bar that's seen better decades. "Sorry, sweetheart. No room for you and the kids this year." Mom sent it with her usual cheerful cruelty, that special blend of passive-aggressive affection that only a mother who's perfected the art of exclusion can deliver. She even added a little Christmas tree emoji at the end, like that somehow softened the blow. As if a tiny digital evergreen could make up for the fact that she was basically telling me and my kids to go kick rocks on the most family-oriented holiday of the year. The audacity was almost impressive, honestly. It takes real skill to make someone feel unwanted while maintaining plausible deniability through punctuation and festive emoticons. I just stared at the message and laughed. Not the haha funny kind of laugh, but that hollow, bitter chuckle you make when the universe delivers the exact same punchline for the 100th time and you're too tired to even pretend to be surprised anymore. No room, huh? That was rich. That was comedy gold. That was the kind of joke that would kill at an open mic night for dysfunctional families. Because here's the thing. Somehow, magically, miraculously, my brother Greg's 3 kids had plenty of room. His golden retriever, a neurotic furball named Captain who humped everything with the enthusiasm of a teenager discovering the internet, had room. And get this, my ex-wife Harper, the woman who'd left me 2 years ago because I lacked ambition and couldn't provide the lifestyle she deserved. Even she had a seat at the table. She'd somehow wormed her way into my family's good graces so thoroughly that she was now more welcome at their house than I was. The woman who'd walked out on our marriage was eating my mother's famous honey-glazed ham while I was about to microwave pizza rolls for Christmas dinner. Let that sink in for a second. My ex-wife, at my family's Christmas dinner, without me. If irony was a commodity, I could have retired off that situation alone. Meanwhile, me and my 2 kids, June, who's 7 and still believes in the fundamental goodness of humanity, and Leo, who's 10 and already showing signs of my cynical DNA, were celebrating in this 1-bedroom apartment that made a college dorm look spacious. We had a plastic tree that I'd bought from a going-out-of-business sale at a pharmacy 3 years ago. The thing was missing about 30% of its branches, leaned slightly to the left like it had scoliosis, and had this gray tint to it that suggested it had either survived a war or possibly caused one. But hey, we'd strung up some lights, thrown some dollar store ornaments on it, and called it festive. That's the spirit of Christmas, right? Making do with what you've got while other people live it up with real trees that smell like pine and privilege. I was still staring at my phone, contemplating whether to respond with something petty or just let the silence speak for itself, when June appeared from behind the half-wall that separated our bedroom from our living room. And yes, I'm using those terms loosely because it was basically one room with a curtain and some wishful thinking. "Dad, are we going to Grandma's?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of that innocent hope that made my chest tighten. She was wearing her favorite red dress, the one with the white trim that made her look like a tiny, adorable candy cane. She'd been excited about it all week, planning what cookies she'd help bake, what games she'd play with her cousins. She didn't know yet that her cousins didn't actually want to play with her, that her grandmother had a VIP list and we weren't on it, that the whole thing was a performance we'd been excluded from before the curtain even went up. I smiled at her, that practiced, professional dad smile I'd perfected over the years, the one that said, "Everything's fine," even when everything was decidedly not fine, and delivered the lie with the skill of a politician at a press conference. Maybe next time, peanut. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but what else was I supposed to say? "Sorry, kiddo, but Grandma loves your uncle more than she loves me, and by extension, more than she loves you. And that's just how the cookie crumbles in this messed up family dynamic we've got going on. Yeah, that wouldn't exactly preserve the magic of Christmas. June nodded, but I could see the disappointment flickering across her face before she hid it behind a brave little smile that broke my heart into approximately 17,000 pieces. Okay, Daddy, can we make hot chocolate instead? Absolutely, I said, ruffling her hair. The good kind, with the mini marshmallows. She scampered off, and I was left standing there with my phone, my crooked tree, and the crushing weight of being perpetually second string in my own family's lineup. Leo emerged from the bathroom, toweling off his hair, and gave me that look, the one that said he knew exactly what was going on but was too polite or too tired to call me out on it. We're not going, are we? He asked flatly. Kid was too perceptive for his own good. Not this year, buddy. Good, he said, shrugging. Uncle Greg's annoying anyway, and Captain keeps trying to lick my face. I laughed, a real laugh this time. Leave it to a 10-year-old to cut through the emotional complexity and just state facts. The truth? There was never going to be a next time. Not after what happened last year. Not after I'd finally seen, with crystal clarity, exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Not after I'd realized that some traditions aren't worth keeping, and some doors aren't worth knocking on when you know damn well they're never going to open. But that's a story for another chapter. Right now, I had hot chocolate to make and a Christmas to salvage, even if it was just the three of us in our tiny apartment with our sad, lopsided tree. At least here, we all had room. I should have seen it coming, honestly. The Christmas Eve rejection wasn't some shocking plot twist. It was just the season finale of a show that had been running for 34 years straight, with the same tired script. Favoritism wasn't just a thing in my family. It was practically our Olympic sport, and Greg had been training for gold since the day he popped out 6 minutes before me. Yeah, we're twins, but somehow those 6 minutes gave him a lifetime VIP pass, while I got stuck with general admission tickets to my own family. Let me paint you a picture of how this played out over the years, because it's almost impressive in its consistency. When we were 8 years old, Greg got a brand new Schwinn bike for his birthday. Fire engine red with chrome handlebars and a bell that actually worked. It was beautiful. It was pristine. It probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Meanwhile, I got what Mom lovingly called a vintage character-building hand-me-down from our cousin Derek, who'd apparently used it as a stunt bike for his backyard jackass-style videos. The thing was held together with duct tape, prayers, and what I'm pretty sure was actual rust forming a structural component. One pedal was missing entirely, so I had to push with one foot like some kind of medieval peasant on a two-wheeled donkey. When I asked Mom why Greg got a new bike and I got Derek's death trap, she smiled that smile. You know the one. The smile that mothers perfect when they're about to gaslight you into thinking inequality is actually a valuable life lesson, and said, well, honey, Greg's been working so hard on his grades. And besides, you're so creative. You can make anything work. Translation, Greg's the favorite, and you're the backup kid we keep around for spare parts and comic relief. The bike incident was just the opening act. The real performance came when we were 16 and Greg decided to take Dad's vintage Mustang for a joyride with his buddies after Dad explicitly, and I mean explicitly, with hand gestures and everything, told us both to never, under any circumstances, touch that car. Greg took it anyway, wrapped it around a mailbox doing 40 in a residential zone, and somehow came home with a slap on the wrist and a speech about learning from mistakes. Dad was mad for like 20 minutes, and then they were bonding over insurance claims and how these things happen. 2 weeks later, I borrowed Mom's Honda Civic, with permission, I might add, to drive to a study group, and I got grounded for a month for being a bad influence on my brother. I didn't even do anything wrong. I returned the car with a full tank of gas and an air freshener shaped like a pine tree. But apparently, according to Mom's logic, the mere fact that Greg had crashed Dad's car meant I must have somehow telepathically influenced him into becoming a reckless driver. The logic was so twisted it could have competed in gymnastics. My buddy Marcus from high school used to joke that I should have been studied by scientists because I'd somehow managed to be the black sheep of the family despite being aggressively average and law-abiding. Dude, he'd say, you literally got grounded for your brother's crimes. That's some biblical scapegoat-level stuff right there. He wasn't wrong. The favoritism reached its peak, or maybe its most insulting low point, when I got married. I was 26, fresh out of law school, working 70-hour weeks at a firm that treated associates like disposable coffee filters, and I'd somehow convinced Harper that I was worth taking a chance on. She was smart, funny, ambitious, and came from a solidly middle-class background. Her dad was a mechanic, her mom was a substitute teacher, and they were good people who worked hard and didn't put on airs. I loved her family because they actually seemed to like me, which was a refreshing change of pace. When I brought Harper home to meet my parents, Mom took one look at her, really looked at her, like she was inspecting produce at the grocery store, and said, with this tight little smile, "She's interesting." Now, for those of you who don't speak passive-aggressive Mom, let me translate. Interesting is code for not rich enough, not impressive enough, and why didn't you marry a doctor or a lawyer or literally anyone else? Harper wasn't wearing designer clothes or dropping names of country clubs her family belonged to, and in my mother's carefully curated social hierarchy, that meant she didn't make the cut. Dad just nodded along, because Dad had perfected the art of staying neutral in family politics by simply having no opinions about anything ever. The man could witness a meteor strike and his response would be, "Well, that's something." Fast forward 3 years, and Greg married his Pilates instructor, Stephanie, a woman who wore athleisure as formal wear, said namaste, unironically in casual conversation, and had one of those Instagram accounts where every post was a carefully staged photo of her doing yoga on a mountaintop or drinking a smoothie that cost more than my monthly phone bill. She was also, conveniently, the daughter of a real estate mogul who owned half the county. Mom didn't just approve of Stephanie. She practically built them a shrine. She threw them an engagement party that looked like it was catered by the same people who do royal weddings. She posted about them constantly on Facebook with captions like, "So blessed to have such an amazing daughter-in-law." Meanwhile, Harper got a card that said, "Welcome to the family," with a grocery store gift card inside for $25. The differences extended to literally everything. Every Christmas, Greg and Stephanie had assigned seats at the dining room table. Actual seats with those little place cards that Mom made with calligraphy and everything. They sat at the head of the table, right next to Mom and Dad, in the good chairs with the cushions that didn't make your ass go numb after 20 minutes. Me? I was lucky if I got the folding chair that squeaked like a dying bird every time I shifted my weight. You know those metal folding chairs that sound like they're screaming in agony with every movement? That was my designated throne. I'd sit there, squeaking away like a rusty hinge, while Greg held court at the other end of the table, regaling everyone with stories about his latest golf handicap or his new boat or whatever privileged nonsense he was into that month. Still, like an idiot with the memory of a goldfish and the hope of a Disney character, I tried. Every single year, I'd call Mom a week or two before Christmas and ask if there was room for me and my family. Every single year, she'd do this thing where she'd pause, like she was actually considering it, like she was checking some imaginary calendar, and then she'd say, in that sweet, understanding voice that made you want to throw your phone into traffic, "Oh, you understand, right? It's just that we've already made arrangements, and you know how tight space gets during the holidays." Tight space. In a 4,000 square foot house with 6 bedrooms and a dining room that could seat 14 people comfortably. Yeah, Mom, I understand. I understand that your family tree's got branches and I'm the dead leaf duct taped to the side, flapping in the wind, barely hanging on, and only kept around because completely disowning me would look bad at church. But you know what? Understanding something and accepting it are two different things entirely. Last year, I decided to be bold. Actually, bold might be giving me too much credit. It was more like desperately optimistic with a side of denial. I'd spent 33 years waiting for permission to exist in my own family, and somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I had this brilliant epiphany that maybe, just maybe, if I stopped waiting for an invitation and just showed up, things would be different. Maybe they'd see me standing there with my kids and a homemade casserole and realize, "Oh snap, we've been terrible, let's fix this right now." Spoiler alert, that's not what happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me set the scene properly, because the whole disaster deserves its full context. It was December 23rd, and I'd been stewing in my apartment for 2 days after receiving the annual "no room" text. Harper had the kids that week per our custody arrangement, which meant I was alone with my thoughts. Never a good combination for someone with my level of unresolved family trauma. I'd been scrolling through Facebook like a masochist, watching Greg post photo after photo of his picture-perfect life. Stephanie doing yoga poses in front of their fireplace, their kids wearing matching Christmas pajamas that probably cost more than my rent, Captain the Golden Retriever wearing a Santa hat and looking absolutely thrilled about it. And there it was, the post that broke me. Mom had commented on one of Greg's photos. "Can't wait to have the whole family together for Christmas. Red Heart Christmas Tree. The whole family." I read those 3 words about 15 times, each reading making my blood pressure tick up another notch. The whole family, except for me and my kids, apparently. We were just footnotes, appendices, the deleted scenes that didn't make the final cut. That's when I snapped. I called my buddy Milo, the guy I worked with who had a healthy appreciation for bad decisions, and told him my plan. "Let me get this straight," he said, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. "You're going to pack up your kids, drive 3 hours, and just show up? Without calling?" "Exactly," I said, pacing around my apartment like I was plotting a heist. "They can't turn me away if I'm standing right there on the doorstep with my children. That's just basic human decency." There was a long pause, and then Milo said, "Buddy, I love you, but have you met your family?" I ignored him because I was on a mission fueled by equal parts righteous indignation and spectacular naivety. So on Christmas Eve morning, I picked up Leo and June from Harper's place. She gave me this weird look when I told her we were going to my parents' house. This mixture of pity and concern that should have been a red flag the size of Texas, but I was too pumped up on misplaced confidence to notice. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" she asked, standing in her doorway in yoga pants and one of those oversized sweaters that cost $100 to look like it came from a thrift store. "It's Christmas, Harper. Family time," I said, like I was delivering some profound wisdom instead of setting myself up for emotional devastation. She just nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone who's about to walk into a glass door and you know it's going to hurt, but you also can't look away. "Okay, good luck." I loaded the kids into my 12-year-old Civic, the same one I'd gotten grounded for borrowing, ironically enough, and we hit the road. I'd made a casserole the night before, this monstrosity of ground beef, noodles, cheese, and cream of mushroom soup that my grandmother used to make. It weighed approximately 40 pounds and could probably double as a doorstop or a murder weapon if the situation called for it. But it was homemade, damn it, and that had to count for something. The drive took 3 hours, and I spent most of it hyping myself up like a boxer before a fight. June was singing Christmas carols in the back seat. Leo was playing on his Nintendo Switch, and I was mentally rehearsing my entrance. I'd be casual, confident, the prodigal son returning not with his tail between his legs, but with his head held high. They'd be surprised, sure, but then they'd welcome us in, and we'd have that Hallmark movie moment where everyone realizes that family is what really matters. God, I was an idiot. We pulled up to my parents' house around 6 p.m., and the place looked like it had been featured in one of those best Christmas lights in the neighborhood competitions. Dad had really gone all out. Lights on every surface, inflatable snowmen, a light-up nativity scene, the works. Cars lined the driveway and the street. Greg's Range Rover, Stephanie's Tesla, and, my stomach dropped, Harper's Lexus. What the hell was Harper's car doing there? "Mom's here," Leo asked, spotting it at the same time I did. "Looks like it, buddy," I said, my confidence starting to crack like thin ice under a Zamboni. I should have turned around right then. I should have listened to that voice in my head screaming that this was a terrible idea. But I'd driven 3 hours with a 40-pound casserole, and I'd be damned if I was going to waste the trip. I grabbed the casserole, told the kids to stay cheerful, and marched up to that front door like I was storming the beaches of Normandy. I rang the doorbell, one of those fancy ones that plays a whole melody, and waited. Dad opened the door, and I swear to God, his face went through about 7 different emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, panic, guilt, more panic, resignation, and finally settling on this weird forced smile that looked like he was being held hostage. "Why didn't you call first?" he stammered, not even saying hello, not even acknowledging his grandchildren standing right there in their nice Christmas outfits that I'd specifically bought for this occasion. "I wanted to surprise you," I said, still holding on to my optimism by a thread. I lifted the casserole like it was a peace offering to angry gods. Brought Grandma's casserole recipe. He just stood there, blocking the doorway, and I could see behind him, The glow of the Christmas tree, the sound of laughter and conversation, someone's kid shrieking happily, and Greg's dog barking. It was like looking through a window into a life I wasn't allowed to have. Then Mom appeared, materializing like a well-dressed ghost, holding a champagne glass and wearing pearls. Pearls. Who wears pearls to a family Christmas dinner? Apparently, my mother does when she's hosting everyone except her own son. "Oh, honey," she said, and those two words carried more rejection than a breakup text. "It's just, well, we're already seated. You understand, right?" There it was. That phrase. You understand, right? The family motto, the get out of guilt-free card, the magical incantation that was supposed to make me okay with being treated like an afterthought. I looked past her, past Dad's uncomfortable stance, and into the dining room. And that's when I saw it. The image that would be burned into my brain forever. Harper was at the table, sitting between Greg and Stephanie, laughing at something someone said. She was wearing a nice dress, holding a wine glass, looking comfortable and welcome in a way I'd never been. My ex-wife. At my family's Christmas dinner, while I stood on the porch with my kids and a casserole, being told there was no room. And that's when I realized, with the kind of clarity that only comes from complete humiliation, that I was the family's unpaid punchline. I was the setup to their jokes, the comparison that made Greg look better, the cautionary tale they probably told at parties. "Oh, you think you have it bad? Let me tell you about our other son." So I did what any man of dignity would do. I turned around, carefully set the casserole on the porch railing, took my kid's hands, and said with a calmness I definitely didn't feel, "Let's go, team." Leo whispered, his voice small and confused. "Did we do something wrong?" "No," I said softly, walking them back to the car while my parents watched from the doorway like spectators at someone else's tragedy. "We just showed up to the wrong movie. We're not in this family script." June started crying quietly, and that's what killed me. Not my own hurt, but hers. We drove to McDonald's, had Christmas Eve dinner under fluorescent lights, and pretended everything was fine. It wasn't fine, but it was the beginning of something better. That night, while my family toasted togetherness, and probably didn't even notice that the casserole I'd left on the porch was getting cold and congealing into something that could be used as industrial adhesive, I sat in my crappy apartment with my kids and made a decision. Not a loud decision, not some dramatic declaration with thunder crashing in the background, just a quiet, bone-deep resolve that settled into my chest like concrete setting. I was done. Done waiting for invitations. Done hoping they'd suddenly develop the emotional intelligence of normal human beings. Done letting their rejection define my worth like I was some kind of stock whose value only mattered when they decided to check the market. But here's the thing about revenge. And I'm talking real revenge, not the petty kind where you key someone's car or leave a bad Yelp review. It doesn't start with rage. It starts with resolve. It starts with sitting down at your kitchen table at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve, opening your laptop, and creating a spreadsheet titled Operation. Get your life together so you can metaphorically flip them off from a distance. Yeah, I actually called it that. Milo thought it was hilarious when I showed him later. The spreadsheet had columns for everything. Current income, projected income, expenses I could cut, side hustles I could start, savings goals, and a timeline. I'm a lawyer, so organizational spite is kind of my superpower. Some people stress eat. Some people stress drink. I stress plan with color-coded Excel sheets and pivot tables. By 3 a.m., I had a 5-year plan that would have made a Soviet economist proud. The goal was simple. Make enough money to be completely, utterly, financially independent from my family's approval. I wanted to reach a point where I didn't need them for anything. Not emotional support, not financial backup, not holiday inclusion. Nothing. I wanted to build a life so solid that their rejection would bounce off it like a rubber ball hitting concrete. But I also wanted, and I'm being honest here, to make them regret it. Not in a "I hope something bad happens to them" kind of way, but in a "I hope they realize what they lost and feel a tiny bit bad about it" kind of way. Is that petty? Absolutely. Do I care? Not even a little bit. The first step was money. I was making decent cash at the law firm, but decent wasn't going to cut it if I wanted to make a statement. So I started picking up every overtime opportunity that came my way. Partners needed someone to work through the weekend on a merger. I'm your guy. Client needed documents reviewed by Monday morning, and it was Friday at 5 p.m. Sign me up. I became that associate who was always available, always willing, always hungry for more work. Not because I love corporate law, I definitely didn't, but because every extra hour was another brick in the fortress I was building. My coworker Sarah noticed first. She cornered me in the break room around February, holding her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to consciousness, and said, "Dude, you're making the rest of us look bad. What happened to you? You used to be the guy who counted down the minutes until 5 p.m. New year, new me," I said, which was corporate speak for, "I'm channeling my family trauma into productivity, and it's working great. Thanks for asking." She studied me for a second, then shrugged. "Whatever you're on, bottle it. You've closed more deals in 2 months than I did all last year." The overtime money was good, but it wasn't enough. I needed something extra, something that would accelerate the timeline. So I started freelancing for a tech startup that one of my law school buddies had launched. They needed someone to handle their contracts, NDAs, and general legal stuff, and they were willing to pay premium rates because they were flush with venture capital and had no idea what things actually cost. I wasn't going to be the one to educate them. I'd work my regular job from 9 to 6, come home and have dinner with the kids, help them with homework, tuck them in by 8:30, and then I'd open my laptop and work for the startup until midnight or 1 a.m. Was it sustainable? Probably not. Was I running on coffee, spite, and the occasional energy drink that tasted like battery acid mixed with regret? Absolutely. But did I care? Not when I checked my bank account and watched those numbers climb like they were training for a marathon. Every ignored phone call became motivation. Every forgotten birthday, mine, not just the kids, became fuel for the fire. My birthday came around in March, and you know what I got from my family? A text from mom that said HBD with a cake emoji. Not even happy birthday. Just the abbreviation, like she couldn't be bothered to type out the full 2 words. Meanwhile, Greg's birthday 2 weeks later got a full Facebook post with a photo album and a paragraph about what an amazing son he was. I took a screenshot of both and added them to a folder on my computer labeled "Remember Why." Sometimes you need visual aids for your grudges. Around April, I realized I had more money to spare, so I started looking at my stuff with a critical eye. What did I actually need versus what was I keeping out of nostalgia or misplaced attachment? My guitar collection, for instance. I had 6 guitars that I'd collected over the years, some from college, some from my failed attempt at being the cool dad who could play Wonderwall at parties. I hadn't touched most of them in years, and they were just gathering dust in the closet like extremely expensive decorations. So I sold them. All of them except one, a beaten-up acoustic that had actually been my grandfather's and had sentimental value beyond just thing I bought to impress people. I listed them on Reverb and Craigslist, and within 2 months, I'd made about $8,000. $8,000 from guitars I wasn't playing, just sitting there, when I could have been building my empire. I sold other stuff too. My vinyl collection, kept the favorites, sold the rest. My gaming console, the kids had their own, and I wasn't using mine. That leather jacket I'd bought during my midlife crisis that made me look less cool biker and more divorced dad trying too hard, gone. Every sale felt like shedding weight, like stripping away the old version of myself that cared about having things just to have things. Milo came over one Saturday in May and looked around my increasingly bare apartment with concern. "Dude, are you okay? Your place looks like you're about to skip town or join a monastery." "I'm liquidating assets," I said, which sounded way more professional than, "I'm selling everything so I can afford to ghost my family in style." "Man," he said, shaking his head but grinning. "If pettiness was a sport, you'd have an Olympic medal by now." "Damn right," I told him, raising my beer in a toast. Gold in silent revenge. Maybe silver in long-term grudge maintenance. He laughed, but there was something in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Milo got it. His family wasn't perfect either, and he understood that sometimes the best response to being treated like you don't matter is to prove, definitively, that you matter just fine without them. By spring, things were actually changing. Not just in my bank account, though that was nice. Seeing numbers that didn't make me anxious every time I checked was a whole new experience. But in other ways too. The partners at the firm started noticing my work ethic. I got pulled into bigger cases, more important clients. In June, I landed a massive deal for a client that brought in over 2 million in billable hours. And suddenly, I wasn't just that associate who works too much. I was that associate who gets results. The senior partner, Richard, called me into his office and offered me a promotion. Junior partner track, significant raise, better benefits, my own office with a window that actually opened. I almost cried right there, but I managed to keep it together and accept with what I hoped looked like professional composure rather than desperate relief. You've really turned things around this year, Richard said, studying me with those sharp eyes that probably saw through my whole revenge motivation thing, but was too polite to mention it. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Just focused on building something, I said, which was true enough. That night, I updated my spreadsheet. The timeline had accelerated. What I planned to take 5 years was now looking like 3, maybe less. The side hustle was growing. The startup wanted to bring me on as their official counsel, which would mean even more money. My savings account, which used to hover around terrifying levels, was now approaching actually substantial. I didn't tell my family about any of it. Not the promotion, not the raise, not the fact that I was, for the first time in my adult life, actually succeeding on my own terms. Every time Mom called, which was rare, usually only when she needed something or wanted to complain about something Greg had done that she'd somehow forgive within 24 hours, I kept the conversation surface level. "How's work?" she'd ask, in that tone that suggested she was asking out of obligation rather than interest. "It's fine," I'd say, not mentioning that I'd just closed a 7-figure deal or that I was being groomed for partnership. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, already distracted by something else. Perfect. Let them think I was still struggling, still the disappointing son with the disappointing life. Let them be surprised later. Because revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's a dish best served when they're hungry and you're the only one who can cook. And I was just getting started. By summer, I was touring apartments in Manhattan like I was auditioning for a reality show about people who'd finally gotten their lives together through spite and spreadsheets. My real estate agent, Monica, was this sharp-dressed woman in her 50s who wore heels that could double as weapons and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from dealing with entitled clients in one of the most competitive housing markets in the country. She'd seen it all, and I could tell she was trying to figure out my deal. "So," she said during our first meeting at a coffee shop in Midtown, looking at me over her tablet like she was a detective interrogating a suspect, "you're a single dad, junior partner at a law firm, looking for something in Manhattan with at least 4 bedrooms, budget around 3 to 4 million. Do I have that right?" 5 bedrooms, actually, I corrected, sipping my overpriced latte that cost more than my entire lunch budget used to be. "And yeah, that's about right." She raised an eyebrow. 5 bedrooms? For you and 2 kids? That's a lot of space." "I like space," I said, which was the understatement of the century. What I really meant was, I want so much space that I could invite my entire family over and still have empty rooms, just to make a point. But that seemed like too much information for a first meeting. Monica studied me for another second, then smiled. The kind of smile that said she'd definitely dealt with weirder clients and wasn't going to judge. "All right then, let's find you some space." We started looking in early June, and let me tell you, apartment hunting in Manhattan is like dating, but worse, because at least in dating you can ghost someone without losing your earnest money deposit. Every place we saw had something wrong with it. Too dark, too small, too far from good schools, too close to a construction site that sounded like World War III was being fought with jackhammers. One place had an absolutely gorgeous view of the Hudson River, but the building had this smell, like someone had mixed old carpet, regret, and possibly a deceased rodent, that I couldn't get past. "You're picky," Monica observed after I turned down the 8th apartment. This one because the kitchen was too cramped and I'd developed this whole vision of hosting dinners where I'd actually have counter space. "I'm selective," I corrected. "There's a difference. I'm not settling for almost right when I can afford exactly right." She laughed at that. "I like you. Most of my clients don't know what they want. You know exactly what you want, even if you won't tell me why you want it." Smart lady. The search continued through June and into July. My buddy Milo came with me to a few viewings because he claimed he needed to ensure I wasn't making a huge mistake, but really he just wanted to see rich people apartments and judge their interior design choices. We saw a penthouse in Tribeca that had a private elevator and a terrace bigger than my current apartment, but the building had this weird rule about no kids using the pool after 6 p.m., which seemed both arbitrary and vaguely discriminatory. "Hard pass," I told Monica. My kids aren't second-class citizens in their own building. See, Milo said as we left. This is why you're a good dad. You're dropping millions on an apartment, and you're still thinking about pool access for Leo and June. Damn right I am, I said. This whole thing is for them as much as it is for me. That wasn't entirely true. A solid 40% of this was definitely about proving a point to my family. But it sounded noble, and Milo didn't need to know about my revenge spreadsheet. Then, in mid-July, Monica called me with that tone in her voice, the one that real estate agents get when they've found something good and they know it. I've got something you need to see. Today, if possible. It won't last. She was right. The moment I walked into that loft in the financial district, I knew this was it. Floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline, like something out of a movie where the protagonist has finally made it. Exposed brick walls that gave it character without trying too hard. An open-concept kitchen with an island big enough to land a helicopter on. Hardwood floors that actually looked like real wood instead of that laminate garbage. And 5 bedrooms. 5 actual, legitimate bedrooms with closets and windows and space to breathe. I walked through each room slowly, taking it in. The master bedroom had its own bathroom with a soaking tub and a shower that had so many jets it looked like a car wash for humans. 2 of the bedrooms were perfect for Leo and June, big enough that they wouldn't feel cramped, with enough space for their stuff and room to grow. The other 2 bedrooms? Guest rooms. Empty rooms. Rooms that existed purely because I could afford them, and because they represented everything my mother's house supposedly didn't have when it came to me and my kids. What do you think? Monica asked, watching me with that knowing look. I'll take it, I said. Don't you want to think about it? Sleep on it. This is a major purchase. I'll take it, I repeated. Whatever I need to do, let's make it happen. Monica grinned. Now we're talking. Let me make some calls. The next 2 weeks were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, mortgage applications, inspections, and negotiations. The sellers wanted $4.2 million. I offered $3.8. We settled at $3.9, which was still an obscene amount of money, but somehow felt worth it when I imagined my kids' faces seeing their new rooms. My lawyer brain kicked into overdrive reviewing every document, every clause, every line of the contract. Milo kept texting me things like, "Dude, are you sure about this? And that's a lot of mortgage, and what if the market crashes?" But I ignored him because I'd done the math 17 different ways and I knew I could afford it. The promotion had come with a salary that made my old paycheck look like lunch money, and the startup had officially brought me on as general counsel with equity options that could be worth serious money if they went public. On July 28th, I sat in a conference room at the title company with Monica, my lawyer, the seller's lawyer, and about 400 pages of documents that all needed my signature. My hand cramped up around page 200, but I kept signing. Every signature felt like a small victory, another nail in the coffin of my old life where I lived in cramped apartments and waited for invitations that never came. When I signed the final document, the deed that officially made me the owner of a 5-bedroom loft in Manhattan, I felt this surge of emotion that I hadn't expected. Not happiness, exactly, and not quite satisfaction. It was more like vindication. Proof. Evidence that I could do this on my own, that I didn't need their approval or their space or their goddamn Christmas dinners. Congratulations, Monica said, shaking my hand. You're officially a Manhattan resident. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. I got the keys 2 weeks later, and moving day was chaos in the best possible way. The kids were with Harper for the week, so I had time to get everything set up before they saw it. I hired movers, actual professional movers, not the guy with a truck situation I'd used for every previous move, and watched as they brought in furniture I'd bought specifically for this place. A real dining table that could seat 8. A couch that didn't have mysterious stains. Beds with actual bed frames instead of mattresses on the floor like I was still in college. Milo came over on moving day with pizza and beer, looking around the loft like he'd stepped into an alternate dimension. Holy shit, dude. You actually did it. Told you I would, I said, opening a beer and standing by the windows, looking out at the skyline. 5 bedrooms, he said, shaking his head. You hear that, Mom? Plenty of room. I laughed, but he'd hit the nail on the head. That was exactly what I was thinking. 5 bedrooms. Plenty of room. Except this time, it was for me and my kids. No dogs named Captain who humped everything in sight. No Greg with his stories about golf handicaps and boat maintenance. No ex-wives who somehow rated higher on the family totem pole than the actual son who'd been there from the beginning. Just us. Just the family that mattered. When I moved in, I didn't post a single photo on social media. No Facebook update with a humble brag caption like "New Beginnings" or "Blessed." No Instagram story with a shot of the skyline and some inspirational quote about dreams coming true. Nothing. Just silence. The same silence they'd given me for years. The same quiet dismissal, but reversed. Let them wonder. Let them not know. Let them continue thinking I was still struggling in my one-bedroom apartment with a plastic tree. The irony wasn't lost on me. They lived 40 minutes away in their big suburban house with their perfect landscaping and their family gatherings I wasn't invited to. And now I was here, in Manhattan, in a place that cost more than they'd probably make in 5 years, and they had no idea. And for once, I hoped they'd need something. I hoped they'd reach out. I hoped they'd suddenly remember I existed and want to visit or ask for help or need a place to stay. Spoiler alert, they did. December 20th rolled around like clockwork, and I was sitting in my home office. Yeah, I had a home office now, because apparently success means having a dedicated room just for staring at your computer and pretending to work while actually online shopping when my phone rang. I didn't even need to check the caller ID. I could feel it in my bones. That sixth sense you develop when you've been conditioned by years of familial disappointment. It was like Spider-Man's Peter Tingle, except instead of sensing danger, I sensed incoming bullshit. I let it ring 3 times before answering, because I'm petty like that, and also because I was genuinely debating whether to pick up at all. But curiosity won out, the same way it always does when you know you're about to witness a train wreck and can't look away. "Hello," I said, going for casual, like I hadn't been expecting this call since approximately last Christmas. "Sweetheart." Mom's voice came through with that particular blend of forced cheerfulness and barely concealed desperation that I'd learned to recognize over 3 decades of being her disappointment. "How are you? We haven't talked in ages." We talked 2 weeks ago when she called to ask if I knew where she could get her iPad fixed because the screen was cracked, and I'd given her the name of a repair shop. She'd said, "Thanks, honey," and hung up without asking how I was or what the kids were doing. But sure, ages. "I'm good, Mom. What's up?" I leaned back in my chair, one of those fancy ergonomic ones that cost more than my first car, and waited for the other shoe to drop. It was coming. I could practically hear the gears turning through the phone. "Well," she said, and there was a pause that spoke volumes. The kind of pause that's pregnant with request, heavy with need, bulging with the expectation that I'd just roll over and help like I always had. "I don't know if you heard, but Greg's having some house troubles." "Oh," I said, channeling my inner lawyer and giving her nothing. This was a negotiation now, and I'd learned from the best, or rather, from representing the worst people in corporate America, how to let silence do the heavy lifting. "Yes, his furnace completely died. Can you believe it? 2 days ago, just stopped working entirely. And with the kids and Stephanie and poor Captain, you know how cold it gets. And they've tried to get someone out there, but apparently there's a part on back order, and it won't be fixed until after New Year's, and hotels are just impossibly expensive this time of year." She was rambling, which meant she was nervous, which meant she was about to ask for something big. I let her keep going, watching the snow fall outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking about how I could see the Empire State Building from here and how absolutely insane that still felt. And we were all supposed to go to Greg's this year. You know, for Christmas, the whole family. But now we can't because it's literally freezing in that house, and the hotels are all booked or charging ridiculous prices, and— "Mom," I interrupted gently, deciding to put her out of her misery. "What do you need?" Another pause, this one shorter but somehow weightier. "Well, we heard. Harper mentioned that you'd moved to Manhattan." Ah, there it was. Harper, my ex-wife, who was apparently still on the family text chain and had evidently mentioned my new living situation. I wondered what else she'd told them. Probably not the part about how I'd worked myself half to death to afford it, or how every square foot of this place represented a year of being told there was no room for me. "Yeah," I said simply. "Moved in August." "That's wonderful, honey. Manhattan. How exciting." Her voice pitched up with that fake enthusiasm that mothers deploy when they're buttering you up for the kill. "And Harper said it's quite spacious?" 5 bedrooms. And there it was. The actual reason for the call, served up on a silver platter of transparent manipulation. It is, I confirmed, and I could feel the smile creeping across my face. This was it. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously waiting for since I'd signed those papers back in July. The universe was handing me poetic justice wrapped up with a bow made of irony. Well, Mom said, her voice dripping with that hopeful tone that probably worked on other people but just made my eye twitch. We thought, and it's totally fine if you can't. We understand if it's an imposition, but we thought maybe we could stay with you for Christmas? Just for a few days. It would be so lovely to finally see your new place, and the kids would love to spend time with their cousins. And, who's we? I asked, cutting through the rambling like a hot knife through butter. Oh, well, your father and me, of course. And Greg and Stephanie and their 3 kids. And Captain, he's such a good dog. You'll love him. And we thought Harper might join us too, since she's basically family, and she's been so lonely since, well, since she left me. Mom almost said but caught herself. Since she decided I wasn't good enough and walked out, leaving me in that shitty apartment with a plastic tree and 2 confused kids who couldn't understand why Mommy didn't want to be a family anymore. So that's what, 11 people and a dog. I said, doing the math out loud. Yes, but like I said, you have 5 bedrooms, plenty of space. And we'd only be there for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, maybe the day after. We'd be out of your hair by the 27th at the latest. Plenty of space. Those words echoed in my head like a chorus in a Greek tragedy. How many times had I heard no room over the years? How many Christmases had I been told that their 4,000 square foot suburban palace somehow couldn't accommodate me and my 2 kids? I let the silence hang there for a moment, savoring it like a fine wine. This was power. This was control. This was every ignored text message and forgotten birthday and family photo I wasn't in, all crystallized into this single moment where I got to decide. You know what's funny, Mom? I said, my voice calm and even, the same tone I used in depositions when I was about to destroy someone's credibility. I just checked my calendar, and actually, we're full. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear her brain short-circuiting, trying to process what I'd just said. What do you mean, full? She asked, her voice losing that cheerful edge and taking on a hint of panic. It's just you and the kids, isn't it? In 5 bedrooms. The kids are staying with me this year, I said, which was true. Harper and I had worked out that I'd have them for Christmas this time. And we've made plans. We're full. But, she started, and I could hear the gears turning, the mental gymnastics beginning. Honey, we're family. Surely you can make room for family. And there it was. The magic word. Family. The same word they'd used as a weapon for years, wielding it when it was convenient, putting it away when it wasn't. Family means you show up. Family means you make space. Family means you don't get to pick and choose who matters based on who's more successful or more interesting or married to someone with money. Exactly, Mom, I said, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline mixing with something that felt suspiciously like vindication. Family comes first. And you always said family is about priorities, right? About making room for the people who matter? Yes, of course, that's why. So I'm prioritizing my family this year. Me and my kids. We're full. No room for guests. I paused, letting that sink in, letting her feel what I'd felt for years. It's funny how that works, isn't it? When you finally understand what someone means by no room, it all becomes so clear. Honey, she said, and now her voice had that edge to it. That tone that said she was moving from confused to frustrated. This is different. We're talking about Christmas. We have nowhere else to go. Greg's house is freezing. Hotels are booked. And every year I had nowhere else to go either. But somehow that was different, right? I kept my voice level, professional even. This wasn't about yelling or losing my cool. This was about boundaries, delivered with the precision of a scalpel. Every year when I asked if there was room, you had your reasons. Well, now I have mine. The kids and I have plans. We're full. But there are 5 bedrooms. Her voice was rising now, the desperation leaking through. I know, I said simply. Plenty of space. Just not for you. You could hear the frost forming on the line. Ice crystals of rejection spreading through the phone connection like winter claiming a lake. I can't believe you're doing this, she said, her voice tight. Over what? Some perceived slight from years ago. We're your family. Right, I said. My family. The family that told me and my kids there was no room, year after year. The family that invited my ex-wife to Christmas while leaving me on the porch with a casserole. That family. Silence. I'm just following your example, Mom. I continued, softer now, but no less firm. You taught me that family is about priorities. You showed me that no room isn't about square footage, it's about who you want there. So this year, I'm choosing my priorities. And unfortunately, they don't include hosting people who've spent years making me feel unwelcome in my own family. Honey, please. Her voice cracked slightly, and part of me, that stupid, hopeful part that never quite dies no matter how much you bury it, wanted to cave. But I didn't. Merry Christmas, Mom, I said. I hope you find somewhere warm to stay. And I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly as I set the phone down on my desk. The New York skyline stretched out before me, indifferent and beautiful, and I sat there in my home office in my 5-bedroom loft and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. The funny thing about finally saying no to someone who spent years expecting you to say yes. It feels better than therapy. And I say that as someone who'd actually tried therapy for a solid 6 months after the divorce, sitting in an office that smelled like lavender and regret, while a nice woman named Dr. Patterson nodded and said things like, "Tell me more about that. And how does that make you feel?" This moment of boundary setting, of standing my ground, of watching the phone screen go dark after hanging up on my mother. This was more cathartic than 45-minute sessions at $150 a pop. I sat there in my office chair, staring at my phone like it might spontaneously combust from the sheer audacity of what I'd just done. My heart was doing this weird thing where it was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but at the same time, I felt this incredible lightness, like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of rocks for 34 years, and someone had just cut the straps. The phone rang again almost immediately. Mom, obviously. I declined the call and watched as it went to voicemail. Then a text came through. "We need to talk about this." I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and went to make myself a drink, because if there was ever a moment that called for whiskey at 2 in the afternoon, this was it. I was standing in my kitchen, my beautiful, spacious kitchen with its marble countertops and fancy appliances that I'd bought just because I could, pouring 2 fingers of Macallan into a crystal glass when my doorbell rang. For a second, I had this irrational fear that my mother had somehow teleported from her house to mine through sheer force of guilt and disappointment. But then I remembered that she didn't actually know my address. Harper might have mentioned I'd moved to Manhattan, but I'd been careful not to share the specific location with anyone in my family. I checked the video doorbell, another fancy upgrade from my old apartment where I just had to guess who was trying to break in, and saw Milo standing there, holding a 6-pack of beer and wearing his usual uniform of jeans and a hoodie that had seen better days. I buzzed him up, and by the time he made it to my floor, the elevator ride giving me just enough time to down half my whiskey, he was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Dude," he said, walking in without waiting for an invitation because that's just how Milo was. "You really told your mom she couldn't come?" Sarah from accounting texted me. "Her sister's cousin is friends with your brother's wife on Facebook or some shit, and apparently the family group chat is absolutely losing it right now." I had to laugh at that. Of course, the news had already spread through the bizarre social network that connected everyone to everyone else in ways that seemed scientifically impossible. "I'm famous," I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. Milo grabbed the 6-pack and headed straight for my fridge, because he'd been here enough times to know where everything was. "Dude, that's savage. That's like next level petty. I'm actually impressed." He cracked open a beer and leaned against my kitchen island, studying me with this mixture of amusement and concern. "How do you feel?" Honestly, I took another sip of whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. "I feel fucking great." And I did. I really did. For years, decades, really. I'd been carrying around this hope that maybe, possibly, if I just tried hard enough or succeeded enough or became impressive enough, my family would suddenly realize I mattered. That they'd look at me and see someone worth making room for, worth including, worth treating like an actual member of the family instead of a spare part they kept in the garage just in case. But that moment on the phone, when my mom had the audacity to say we're family, like it was some kind of trump card that automatically negated years of being treated like an afterthought, that's when it clicked. They didn't get to use family as a weapon when it was convenient and a shield when it wasn't. They didn't get to decide that family meant unconditional access to my space, my time, and my life after years of making it crystal clear that I wasn't part of their definition of family when it actually mattered. This is closure, I told Milo, grinning. Served chilled, like a good bottle of champagne or revenge in a Shakespeare play. He laughed and clinked his beer bottle against my glass. To closure, and to having the balls to actually follow through. He paused, taking a long drink. You know they're going to call back, right? Your dad, probably. Or Greg. Someone's going to try the guilt angle. Let them, I said, and I meant it. I'm done feeling guilty for setting boundaries. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. And I'm definitely done pretending that their version of family is something I need to be part of. We moved to the living room, and Milo sprawled out on my couch. The nice one, the one that didn't have mystery stains or springs poking through the cushions, and shook his head. Man, I wish I could have been there for the phone call. What did she say when you told her you were full? She stuttered, I said, smiling at the memory even though it had happened less than an hour ago. Like her brain couldn't process that I'd actually said no. Then she tried the "but we're family" line, which is rich coming from someone who spent years making me feel like the family's consolation prize. Did you tell her that? More or less, I said. I kept it civil, professional even. Didn't yell, didn't curse. Just told her that I learned from her example about how no room isn't about square footage, it's about priorities. And my priorities this year are me and my kids. Milo was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. You know what? Good. Good for you, man. Seriously, I've watched you bend over backwards for those people for years, and all they've done is take advantage of it. Still, even with Milo's validation and the whiskey warming my stomach and the undeniable satisfaction of finally standing up for myself, part of me couldn't help but wonder if I'd gone too far. That voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Dr. Patterson from therapy, was asking questions like, is this really about boundaries, or is this revenge? And are you sure you won't regret this? I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the facts, the way I would in a courtroom. Let's examine the evidence, shall we? Exhibit A. Every Christmas for the past decade where I'd been told there was no room, even though their house could comfortably sleep 15 people. Exhibit B. Last Christmas, when I'd driven 3 hours with my kids and a homemade casserole, only to be turned away at the door while my ex-wife sat inside at their table. Exhibit C. Every birthday, graduation, promotion, and milestone that had been ignored or minimized while Greg's achievements were celebrated like he'd cured cancer. Exhibit D. My kids. My two beautiful, sweet kids who'd spent years wondering why Grandma didn't want to see them, why Uncle Greg's kids got Christmas presents and they got gift cards, why they weren't good enough to be part of the family photos that got posted on Facebook with captions about being blessed. That last one was the kicker. When I thought about June sitting by the window last year, watching for a car that was never going to come, asking me in her small voice if we'd done something wrong, that's when any doubt I had evaporated like morning dew in the sun. You know what? I said to Milo, sitting up straighter. I don't think I went too far. I think I went exactly far enough. They made their choice years ago. They chose Greg. They chose appearances. They chose comfort over inclusion. And I'm just accepting their choice and making my own. Which is, to stop hurting for them, I said simply. I've spent so much time and energy trying to earn their approval, trying to understand why I wasn't enough, trying to figure out what I could do differently to make them care. And you know what? I'm done. I'm done hurting myself by hoping for something they're never going to give me. This isn't revenge, Milo. This is balance. This is me finally putting on my own oxygen mask instead of passing out while trying to save people who don't even realize they're drowning me. Milo nodded slowly, and I could see something like respect in his eyes. That's deep, man. Did you prepare that speech? No, I laughed. But I probably should have, because knowing my family, I'm going to have to repeat it about 6 more times before they actually hear it. We sat there for a while, drinking and talking about other things, his dating life, disastrous, work drama, entertaining, and whether the Knicks would ever win another championship, unlikely. But the whole time, I kept glancing at my phone, watching the notifications pile up. 3 more calls from Mom. 2 from Dad. A text from Greg that just said, "Really, dude?" A longer text from Stephanie that started with, "I know we're not close, but," that I didn't bother reading all the way through. And you know what? Each notification, Each attempt to guilt me or convince me or make me feel bad about my decision just reinforced that I'd made the right call. By the time Milo left around 6, he had a date with someone he'd met on one of those apps where everyone lies about their height and their personality. I was feeling good. Not just satisfied, but genuinely, deeply good. The kind of good that comes from knowing you've done something difficult but necessary, like ripping off a Band-Aid or finally telling your barber that you actually hate the haircut he's been giving you for 5 years. I ordered Thai food, the expensive kind from that place in Soho that charges $20 for pad Thai, but makes it so good you don't even care, and ate it while watching the city lights come on outside my windows. The Empire State Building lit up in red and green for the holidays, and I sat there thinking about how far I'd come from that one-bedroom apartment with the plastic tree. This wasn't about the money or the apartment or even the satisfaction of finally saying no. It was about reclaiming myself, about deciding that my worth wasn't determined by whether my family could see it. And that, my friends, felt better than any Christmas dinner ever could. Christmas Eve came rolling in like a Hallmark movie directed by someone who actually understood irony, and Manhattan decided to show off. The city was glittering outside my window like someone had taken every Christmas light in America and said, "You know what? Let's just put them all in one place and make it absolutely ridiculous." The Empire State Building was doing its red and green color-changing thing. The skyscrapers were outlined in white lights that made them look like giant presents wrapped by a deity with decent taste. And Central Park, visible from my corner windows if I squinted and pretended I had better eyesight, was probably covered in that perfect movie snow that exists nowhere else in the real world. Inside my loft, things were equally impressive, if I do say so myself. I'd gone all out this year, partially because I wanted to give my kids the best Christmas possible, and partially because I'm petty enough to make sure everything was Instagram perfect in case I decided to rub it in later. The dining table, real wood, seats 8 comfortably, cost more than my first car and my second car combined, was set like I was expecting the ghost of Martha Stewart to show up and judge my presentation skills. I'd cooked an actual roasted duck because turkey felt too pedestrian, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle fancy poultry without burning down my kitchen. The mashed potatoes were homemade. None of that boxed garbage with the suspicious flakes that reconstitute into something that technically qualifies as food. I had roasted vegetables that actually looked like the photos in cooking magazines, a bottle of wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week, and the piece de resistance, actual matching napkins. Not paper towels folded into triangles, not mismatched cloth napkins from 3 different decades, but honest-to-God matching linen napkins that I'd bought from Williams-Sonoma like a proper adult. June and Leo were dancing around the living room to Christmas music, high on sugar cookies, and the kind of pure joy that only kids can achieve when they're not yet cynical enough to question whether happiness is sustainable. June was wearing this red velvet dress that made her look like a tiny Christmas angel, and Leo had actually agreed to wear the button-down shirt I'd bought him without complaining that it was too fancy or not comfortable. Small miracles. I was in the kitchen, basting the duck for the 3rd time, because apparently that's what you do when you cook duck, and wanted to not taste like expensive shoe leather when my doorbell rang. I checked the video screen and saw Sandra from down the hall, holding what looked like a pie container and wearing one of those ugly Christmas sweaters that was so aggressively festive it could probably be seen from space. Sandra was this 50-something graphic designer who'd lived in the building for 15 years and had appointed herself the unofficial welcome wagon for new residents. She'd shown up the day I moved in with cookies and a list of the best takeout places in the neighborhood, and we'd become what I'd call casual friends, the kind where you say hi in the elevator and occasionally borrow each other's Amazon packages when delivery gets confused. I buzzed her up, and she came in carrying her pie like it was the Holy Grail. "Merry Christmas, neighbor," she announced, her sweater featuring a 3D Rudolph with an actual light-up nose. "I made my famous apple pie and figured you could use some dessert since you're doing the whole domestic god thing tonight." "Domestic god?" I said, taking the pie from her and setting it on the counter. "That's generous. I'm more like domestic guy who Googled how to cook duck at 2 a.m. and hoped for the best." She laughed and looked around, taking in the set table and the kids dancing and the general atmosphere of functional adult who has his life together, which was hilarious considering I'd been a disaster less than 2 years ago. For a guy who used to eat instant noodles for dinner 3 nights a week, you clean up nice, she teased, referencing a conversation we'd had in the elevator once where I'd admitted my previous culinary limitations. I smirked, pulling the duck out of the oven to check on it. Petty success looks good on me. Turns out when you're motivated by spite and the desire to prove everyone wrong, you can accomplish almost anything. Spite is an underrated motivator, Sandra agreed, stealing a cookie from the plate I'd set out for the kids. My entire career is built on proving my ex-husband wrong about my artistic abilities. He said I'd never make it as a designer, and now I make 3 times what he does as an accountant. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and occasionally checking LinkedIn to see that they're still stuck in the same dead-end job. I was about to respond with something equally petty and satisfying when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and felt my good mood deflate slightly. Mom. Again. This was the 4th call today, not counting the dozen text messages that had progressively gone from, "We need to talk," to "This is ridiculous," to "Your father wants to speak with you." I almost didn't answer, but Sandra was watching me with curious eyes, and the kids were close enough to hear, so I figured I might as well get it over with. I stepped into my office and closed the door, taking a deep breath before answering. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Sweetheart," she said, and her voice sounded different, smaller, almost fragile. "Your father slipped on ice this morning. He's okay," she added quickly, probably hearing my sharp intake of breath, "just bruised his hip pretty badly. But the hotel we booked, they overbooked, can you believe it? They just called and said they don't have a room for us after all, something about a system error. And Greg is stuck at Stephanie's parents' house because of the snowstorm upstate, and—" Her voice cracked slightly. "Can we come for dinner? Just for tonight? We don't need to stay over, we can find somewhere else, but it's Christmas Eve and your father is hurting, and we just want to be with family." I looked out my office window at the Manhattan skyline. All those buildings full of people having their own Christmas Eves, their own family dramas, their own moments of decision. Part of me, that stupid, hopeful part that never quite dies no matter how many times you try to strangle it, wanted to say yes. To open the door and let them in and pretend that one nice dinner could erase years of being treated like I didn't matter. But then I turned and looked toward the living room, where I could see June and Leo through the doorway, dancing and laughing, completely at peace in a home where they didn't have to wonder if they were wanted. I walked back toward the dining room, the phone still pressed to my ear, and looked at the guest rooms visible down the hallway. 2 of them, perfectly made with fresh sheets and warm lighting and enough space for a small family. Space I'd specifically created. Space that represented everything they'd told me didn't exist when it came to me and my kids. "You know what's funny, Mom?" I said softly, my eyes still on those empty rooms. "Every year you told us there wasn't room. Every single year. You had your reasons. Greg's family was already coming. The dog needed space. Harper had already been invited. Whatever the excuse was that particular Christmas. And I believed you. I thought maybe your house really was just too small, even though basic math and square footage suggested otherwise. Honey, and now I finally get it." I continued, my voice calm and steady. "Space isn't about square footage. It's not about how many bedrooms you have or how big your table is. It's about priorities. It's about who you choose to make room for, who you decide matters enough to inconvenience yourself for, who you love enough to squeeze in even when it's not perfectly convenient." "Please," she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice. "It's Christmas. You made your choice," I said quietly, looking at my kids, at my table, at the life I'd built without them. "Every year for a decade, you made it. You chose who mattered and who didn't. You chose who got seats at the table and who got the folding chair that squeaked. You chose who was family and who was optional. We never met. I just learned from the best, Mom," I said, and I hung up before she could finish. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. Sandra had apparently let herself out while I was on the call, leaving the pie on the counter with a note that said, "Enjoy your evening." I walked back to the dining room where my kids were waiting, their faces bright with excitement, and smiled. "Ready for dinner?" I asked. "Yes," they shouted in unison. And for the first time in years, I meant it when I said, "Me too." Silence never sounded so good, and I'm not talking about that awkward, tension-filled silence you get when someone says something inappropriate at Thanksgiving and everyone suddenly becomes fascinated with their mashed potatoes. I'm talking about real silence. The kind that comes from peace, from contentment, from not having to perform or pretend or navigate the emotional minefield of family dynamics that require a PhD in psychology and a drink stronger than eggnog to survive. We ate dinner at the big table, just the three of us spread out across seats that could have fit eight. In the past, this might have felt lonely, like we were rattling around in too much space, trying to fill a void with expensive furniture and good intentions. But tonight it felt exactly right, like we'd finally found the correct sized container for our little family instead of trying to squeeze ourselves into someone else's too small box. The duck turned out surprisingly good, considering I'd learned how to cook it from a YouTube video made by a guy with a man bun who kept saying things like, "Respect the bird," and "Let the fat render naturally, bro." Leo, who usually ate chicken nuggets like they were going out of style and treated vegetables like they were personally offensive, actually tried everything on his plate without me having to bribe him. "Dad, this is really good," he said, sounding genuinely surprised that I could produce food that didn't come from a delivery app or a microwave. "Don't sound so shocked," I said, pretending to be offended. "I have skills, hidden skills, dad skills that only emerge under specific circumstances. Like when you want to prove something to Grandma?" June asked innocently, and I nearly choked on my wine because apparently 7-year-olds are more perceptive than CIA interrogators. "Maybe a little," I admitted, because lying to your kids about your motivations seems like the kind of thing that leads to them writing tell-all books about you later. But mostly because I wanted us to have a really nice Christmas. "Just us. I like just us," June said, swinging her legs under the table. They didn't quite reach the floor yet, and something about that made my chest tight. "It's quiet. Not like when we used to go to Grandma's and everyone was yelling and Captain kept trying to eat my cookies." Leo nodded in agreement. "And Uncle Greg's kids are kind of mean. They always made fun of our clothes." I hadn't known that. They'd never told me that before, and I felt this surge of retroactive anger mixed with guilt that I'd been trying so hard to force them into a situation where they were being treated badly. I'd been so focused on my own rejection that I hadn't fully registered that they were experiencing it too, just in different ways. "Well," I said, raising my glass of wine while they raised their cups of sparkling cider that I bought specifically to make them feel fancy, "here's to just us. To quiet Christmases. To nobody making fun of anybody's clothes. And to Captain not being here to steal cookies." "To Captain not being here," they shouted in unison, clinking their glasses against mine with enough enthusiasm that I worried briefly about spillage, but I didn't care. Let them spill. That's what expensive napkins are for, apparently. After dinner, we moved to the living room, and I put on one of those streaming Yule log videos on the TV because I had a real fireplace that was mostly decorative and I hadn't yet figured out how to use it without potentially burning down a multi-million-dollar building. The fake fire would have to do, but honestly, it was kind of perfect. All the ambience, none of the risk of property damage. We opened presents, which was its own kind of magic. Last year, I'd scraped together what I could afford on my old salary, and while the kids had been grateful, there'd been this understanding in their eyes that things were tight, that Dad was doing his best, but best wasn't always enough. This year was different. I hadn't gone crazy. I'm not trying to raise entitled kids who think money grows on trees, even though I now had enough money that it kind of felt like it did, but I'd been able to get them things they actually wanted instead of things that were close enough to what they wanted that we could all pretend it was the same thing. Leo got the gaming console he'd been hinting about since September, and the way his eyes lit up made every overtime hour, every late-night freelance session, every moment of exhaustion worth it. June got an American Girl doll. Not the knockoff version from Target that's technically the same, but everyone knows isn't, but the real deal from the actual store with the outfit and accessories and everything. She literally screamed, which in 7-year-old girl language is the equivalent of a standing ovation. "This is the best Christmas ever," June declared, hugging her doll like it might disappear if she let go, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not break. Nothing was breaking anymore, but opening, like a window letting in fresh air after being closed for too long. "Yeah," Leo agreed, already unboxing his console with the focus of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. "Way better than Grandma's house." I pulled out my phone to take a picture of them. June with her doll, Leo with his pile of gaming equipment, both of them smiling in that unself-conscious way that kids do when they're genuinely happy. And that's when I saw the notification count. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages. The family group chat that I'd been added to years ago, but usually muted, was showing 156 unread messages. I swiped the notifications away without reading them and took my picture. This moment, this perfect, peaceful moment, wasn't going to be interrupted by guilt trips or emotional manipulation or whatever crisis they'd manufactured to try to change my mind. No forced laughter tonight. No awkward small talk with relatives I didn't like. No sitting on the squeaky chair at the far end of the table while everyone else bonded over inside jokes I wasn't part of. No watching my ex-wife be more welcomed into my family than I was. No explaining to my kids why they weren't as important as their cousins. Just peace. Just us. Around 9, we went up to the roof deck. Yes, the building had a roof deck, because apparently when you pay Manhattan prices you get Manhattan amenities, and watch the fireworks. Some company or another was doing a display over the Hudson, and from our vantage point, we could see them perfectly. The kids stood at the railing, safely back from the edge because I'm not trying to give myself a heart attack, oohing and awing at each explosion of color against the night sky. June turned to me, her face illuminated by the red and gold of a particularly impressive firework, and whispered like she was sharing a secret. "Dad, this is the best Christmas ever." And for the first time in years, maybe in forever, I agreed without any reservations or qualifications or mental asterisks. "Yeah, Peanut," I said, pulling her close while Leo leaned against my other side. "It really is." I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had fueled my spreadsheet and my work ethic and my single-minded determination to succeed had burned itself out somewhere between hanging up on my mother and watching my kids open presents. I wasn't waiting to be invited anymore. Wasn't hoping they'd suddenly see my worth. Wasn't holding my breath for an apology that was never going to come. I'd built my own table, and it was full of love, laughter, terrible dad jokes that made my kids groan, and takeout leftovers that I didn't have to share with Greg's hyperactive dog or anyone else who'd spent years making me feel like I was taking up too much space just by existing. We went back downstairs around 10, and I tucked them into their rooms. Their actual rooms with their actual beds and their actual stuff, not a borrowed couch or an air mattress on someone's floor or a sleeping bag in the corner, while the real family got the real beds. June fell asleep clutching her doll, and Leo was already gaming with his headphones on, lost in whatever digital world 13-year-olds escape to these days. I walked through my loft, turning off lights and putting away dishes and doing all the mundane tasks that make up a life, and I felt this profound sense of gratitude. Not for the apartment or the money or even the satisfaction of telling my family no, though that was nice, I won't lie, but for this. For quiet. For peace. For a Christmas where nobody made me feel small. I poured myself a final glass of that expensive scotch, stood by my floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city that never sleeps, and raised my glass to my reflection. "Merry Christmas," I said softly. We made it. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I had absolutely nothing to prove and nowhere I'd rather be. Near midnight, after the kids were asleep and the city had settled into that weird liminal space between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, I made the mistake of checking my phone. I say mistake because ignorance is bliss, and I'd been pretty blissful for the past few hours pretending that my family wasn't having a collective meltdown 40 minutes away in their suburban fortress of dysfunction. The screen lit up like a slot machine hitting jackpot, except instead of winning money, I'd won guilt trips and emotional manipulation. Missed calls, 37. Text messages, 62. Voicemails, I didn't even want to know. The family group chat, the one I'd muted years ago after realizing it was just a platform for everyone to praise Greg and ignore me, had 203 unread messages. I scrolled through some of them, because apparently I'm a masochist who enjoys watching train wrecks in slow motion. "Mom, we didn't mean it like that." "Dad, can we talk about this like adults?" "Greg, dude, seriously? It's Christmas." "Stephanie, think about your parents. They're getting older." "Harper, maybe you should reconsider. Family is important." That last one from Harper made me laugh out loud. Actually laugh, not that bitter chuckle I'd perfected over the years. My ex-wife, who'd left me because I wasn't ambitious enough, was now lecturing me about family values. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it as a side dish. But you know what I didn't see in any of those messages? An actual apology. Not one. I'm sorry for how we treated you. Not one, we were wrong. Not one acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they'd spent years making me feel like I didn't matter and that might have consequences. Just a lot of, we didn't mean it, and you're overreacting and think about us. Which, let's be honest, is exactly what they'd been doing for years. Thinking about themselves, their convenience, their comfort, their perfect family portrait that looked better without me in it. I sat there on my couch, drink in hand, looking at those messages, and I realized something profound. I didn't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not a justification, not a carefully worded response that made them feel better about their behavior. I'd spent 34 years trying to earn their love and approval, and I was done. The restaurant was closed. The kitchen was shut down. We were out of whatever they were looking for. But I'm also petty. We've established this, and silence, while powerful, didn't quite scratch the itch of wanting them to see what they'd thrown away. So I did something that was probably immature, but felt absolutely right in the moment. I opened my photo app, found the picture I'd taken earlier of Leo and June by the Christmas tree with the Manhattan skyline glowing behind them through the windows, and I really looked at it. My kids, smiling genuinely, surrounded by wrapped presents and twinkling lights. In our home where they were wanted and loved and didn't have to compete for scraps of attention. I sent it to the family group chat, unmuted it just for this moment, and added a caption, "We're full." Then I turned off my phone completely. Not do not disturb, not airplane mode, fully off, watching the screen go black like closing the curtain on a show that had run way too long. I leaned back on my couch, this beautiful piece of furniture in my beautiful apartment in my beautiful life that I'd built myself without their help or approval, and I whispered to the empty room, "Finally, so am I." Not bitter, not broken, not waiting anymore. Just full of peace, gratitude, and the best roast duck I've ever cooked, if I do say so myself. The city lights glittered outside my windows like a million tiny affirmations, and somewhere out there, my family was probably losing their minds over a two-word text message and a photo. Let them. Let them stew in it. Let them realize that no room works both ways, and karma's got a wicked sense of humor and excellent timing. I raised my glass to the skyline, to my sleeping kids, to myself for finally understanding that family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about who shows up, who makes room, who chooses you back. And this year, I chose us. Merry Christmas to me.